Welcome to the Golden Line. Chapter 6. The Royal Kingdom. Israel wanted a king they could see, but God was preparing the world for the true king.
Mom, is this where Israel finally becomes a real kingdom?
Yes. At the end of chapter 5, Israel was living in the time of the judges. God had brought his people into the promised land. But after Joshua died, Israel kept falling into the same painful cycle. Israel needed leadership. They needed order. Welcome to chapter 6, the Royal Kingdom.
The royal kingdom sounds exciting. So this is where we finally meet the kings?
Exactly. And in this chapter, we follow 3 famous kings: Saul, David, and Solomon. Each one ruled for 40 years. Saul was Israel's first king. But this chapter is not only about crowns, battles, palaces, and power. It is about the human heart. They wanted a king who looked powerful, a king who could lead them into battle, a king who would make them feel safe. But God was supposed to be their king. Still, God allowed them to have what they asked for. And their first king was Saul.
Was Saul a good king at first?
At first, Saul looked like the perfect king. Imagine him entering the camp of Israel. Tall, strong, impressive, dressed like a warrior. The soldiers look up at him and think, yes, this is our king. Saul looked like the kind of leader people wanted. And in the beginning, he gave Israel hope. He led battles. He won victories. He looked brave and royal. But Saul had a problem. His heart was fragile. When fear pressed on him, he stopped trusting God. Before one battle with the Philistines, Saul was told to wait. He was supposed to wait for the proper sacrifice before going into battle. But the soldiers started to panic. Some were running away. Some were hiding. The army was falling apart. Saul looked around and became afraid. Instead of waiting on God, he took control. He offered the sacrifice himself. It may sound like a small mistake, but it showed something dangerous inside Saul. He thought fear gave him permission to disobey. Later, Saul disobeyed God again. He kept what he wanted, then made excuses when he was confronted. He blamed the people. He blamed the pressure. He blamed the situation. But he did not humble himself. Saul had the crown, but he did not have the heart. And that is one of the first big lessons of this chapter. People look at the outside. God looks at the heart. Israel wanted Saul because he looked like a king, but God chose someone else. God chose David. David was not in a palace. He was not wearing armor. He was not sitting on a throne. He was out in the fields watching sheep. David was a shepherd boy, but hidden in those fields, God was preparing him. David learned courage while protecting the sheep. When danger came, he did not run away. He faced wild animals. He guarded the flock. He learned to trust God when no one was watching. That matters, because sometimes God trains people in hidden places before he uses them in public places. Then came the famous battle with Goliath. The Philistines gathered on one side of the valley. Israel stood on the other side. And every day, a giant warrior named Goliath stepped forward. He was huge, armored, terrifying. His spear was massive. His shield-bearer walked before him. His voice thundered across the valley. He mocked Israel. He mocked their army. He mocked their God. And everyone was afraid. Even Saul, the tall warrior king, stayed back. Then David arrived. He was not there as a soldier. He had only come to bring food to his brothers. But when David heard Goliath mocking the living God, something rose up inside him. David looked at the giant, then looked at the frightened army, and he understood something they had forgotten. The battle belonged to the Lord. Saul offered David his armor, but it did not fit. David did not need Saul's armor. He took his sling. He chose smooth stones. And he walked into the valley.
Wait, the king is hiding, but the shepherd boy is walking forward?
Exactly. Saul had the crown, but David had faith. Goliath came with sword, spear, and armor. David came in the name of the Lord. Then David ran toward the giant. One sling, one stone, one act of faith, and Goliath fell.
That story never gets old.
David was strong because he trusted God, even when everyone else was afraid. After that, David became a hero. The people sang, "Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands." But that song filled Saul with jealousy. Saul became angry, then suspicious, then dangerous. One day, while David played music in the palace, Saul sat in the shadows with a spear in his hand. His jealousy burned inside him. Suddenly, Saul threw the spear at David. David escaped. But from that moment, Saul began hunting him. David ran into the wilderness. He hid in caves. He lived like an outlaw. But even in the wilderness, David kept trusting God. Several times, David had the chance to kill Saul and take the throne. Once, Saul entered a cave, not knowing David and his men were hiding inside. David's men whispered, "This is your chance." But David refused. He would not kill Saul. He would not grab the crown by force. Saul acted from fear. David waited in faith. Eventually, Saul died in battle against the Philistines. It was a tragic end for Israel's first king. Then David became king, first over Judah, then over all Israel. He united the tribes and captured Jerusalem. Jerusalem became the capital city. David brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. The Ark represented God's presence among his people. The people celebrated. Music filled the streets. Trumpets sounded. The Ark moved toward the city, and David danced before the Lord with joy. This was a powerful moment. David showed that a true king should lead people back to God. Then David wanted to build a temple for the Lord. He looked at his palace and thought, "I live in a beautiful house, but the Ark of God is still in a tent." David wanted to build God a house, but God said no. David's son would build the temple. Then God gave David something greater. David wanted to build a house for God, but God promised to build a house for David. Not a building, a dynasty, a royal family line. God promised that David's throne would be established forever. And this is where the golden line becomes royal.
So David's family is now the golden line?
Yes, the promised Savior will come through David's family. That is why Jesus is later called the Son of David. The promise is becoming clearer. The golden line is now shining through a throne. But David himself was not the perfect king. The Bible is very honest about that. David sinned terribly. He saw Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. David took her. Then, when he tried to hide his sin, he arranged for Uriah to be placed in the front line of battle where Uriah was killed. It was a terrible abuse of power. The shepherd king had fallen into deep sin. But God did not leave David in darkness. He sent the prophet Nathan. Nathan came to David and told him a story. There was a rich man with many sheep, and there was a poor man with only one little lamb. The poor man loved that lamb, but the rich man took the poor man's lamb for himself. David became angry. He said the rich man deserved judgment. Then Nathan looked at David and said, "You are the man." In that moment, David saw his sin. But unlike Saul, David did not make excuses. He did not blame others. He said, "I have sinned against the Lord." David repented. He humbled himself before God. But his sin still brought painful consequences. His family suffered.
So David had faith, but still needed mercy?
Exactly. David repented, and God's promise did not fail. David shows us both the beauty and the weakness of human kings. He had faith, but he was still a sinner who needed mercy. David points forward to someone better. Jesus is the perfect shepherd king who gives forgiveness. After David, his son Solomon became king. His story begins beautifully. God appeared and asked what he wanted. Solomon could have asked for gold. He could have asked for long life. He could have asked for victory over his enemies.
What did Solomon ask for?
Wisdom, so he could rule God's people well. God was pleased and gave Solomon wisdom. He also gave him wealth and honor. Solomon became famous. One of his most famous moments happened in court. Two women came before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same baby. The room was tense. Both women argued. Each one said, "The child is mine." Solomon listened. Then he gave a shocking test. He said the baby should be divided. One woman agreed, but the true mother cried out, "No, let the child live. Give him to her." Solomon knew immediately who the real mother was. True love wanted the child to live. Solomon's wisdom spread across the nations. People came from far away to hear him. Under Solomon, Israel reached its golden age. There was peace, wealth, fame, wisdom, and hope. And Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. This was the temple David had dreamed of. It took 7 years to build. When it was finished, the people gathered for worship. Jerusalem was glorious. The temple stood as the center of worship. But then Solomon's heart began to drift, and the king slowly trusted power more than God. He collected horses and chariots. He gathered huge amounts of gold. He took many foreign wives. But God had warned Israel's kings not to multiply horses, wives, and gold, because those things could slowly steal the king's trust. Solomon had wisdom, but he slowly began trusting power, alliances, and riches. His foreign wives brought false gods, and Solomon's heart turned away from the Lord. The wise king became divided.
How could Solomon, with so much wisdom, still fall so far?
Because wisdom cannot protect a heart that stops loving God. That is a powerful lesson for us. A person can be gifted and still drift from God. A person can be wise and still become proud. Saul teaches us that appearance and strength are not enough if the heart does not obey God. David teaches us that even a faithful soul still needs mercy. Solomon teaches us that mind or wisdom alone is not enough. Jesus said in Matthew 22:37, "Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind." And that is what this chapter teaches us. After Solomon died, the kingdom splits.
So the royal kingdom ends divided?
Yes, but God's promise does not break. And that brings us to the divided kingdom. In the next chapter, one kingdom becomes two. There will be many kings, many prophets, and many warnings. But even in the division, the golden line will keep moving forward.